Khe Sanh combat base. 1962, there's an old French fort. They decided to put a special forces camp here, CIDG, Civilian Irregular Defense Group. Keep an eye on infiltration. CIA comes in and puts a special listing post in here. Nothing going on, very quiet. 1964, they add a little bit more to it, but not a whole lot. 1965, William Westmoreland says, I want this place held. The Marine Corps goes, we don't want to have our guys out here. It's a waste of time, space. The road is awful, as we so well saw, and that's the improved road. Much of it's new that we came across. But you know what it was like trying to get here. They said there's nothing out here worth fighting for. It's just like Laos. But Westmoreland is insistent. He says that will anchor our line along the DMZ. 1967, there's one company of Marines here, one company. They're here on a base camp. They start getting intel that you can't see there, but if you go out by the runway, you'll be able to see a couple of hills off to the north and west. They hear there's some infiltration going on. 2/3 of the company goes up there to see what's going on, and they get decimated. They get wiped out, and not wiped out, but they had tremendous casualties in the morning. Helicopters trying to come in and pick them up are getting shot at. They emergency airlift another company of Marines in here who have no clue what they're doing. They land here, they march to the sound of battle, and they become heavily engaged. It ends up being the hill fights. You may have seen that picture of a Marine medic leaning over a dying Marine. Famous picture by Catherine Leroy from 1967. There's a model of it, actually a statue at the Marine Museum in Quantico, Virginia, of that particular event. That happened right up here in Hill 67. Things quiet down. Remember how they said we're going to bring the Americans out to the fringes, then we're going to take over all the towns. They start cranking this place up again towards the end of 67. They cut and ambush a convoy. They cut the road. There's never a convoy driven here again throughout the time until the Army gets here later in 68. So it's cut off. They're doing everything by resupply. Westmoreland says this is a chance, unlike Dien Bien Phu, where the French had this outpost out there. They couldn't support it by air and they didn't have the firepower. We are different. We have firepower. We have aviation. We can do it all by air. Land them here, drop parachutes, supply in if we have to, and helicopters by the thousands. We'll do what we have to do to keep Khe Sanh going, because that's the major battle of 1968. He was convinced of it even when Tet happened. He said, all that stuff going on in Hue, Saigon and all that, that's just a distraction. They really want this place. Anyways, they end up with 6,000 Marines, but they're not here. There's thousands of Marines here, but they're in hills. Like right over there, you can see Hill 950. If you look to the right, Hill 1015. 950 has a communications detachment. They have other things going on up there as well. They've got about 175 Marines up there. Further up there, we've got different hills. I'm going to read them off. 861, 881 north, 881 south, 558. You have a ring of Marines fortifying this base, this combat base. The press doesn't get out to those places, so all the videos you see of the shelling going on here, which was significant, that was taken by reporters who were here. The real challenge was keeping those outposts going, because if they lost those outposts on the 800 number hills, they would lose the base. They tried to take those hills. The challenge became resupplying them. Helicopters going out with supplies and people would get shot down. So the Marines had to do this very complicated thing where they would bring in fighters that would drop bombs to create a smoke screen barrier on each side. And the helicopters would go en masse through the smoke, get to the hill, drop off their stuff, pick up their stuff, come back here. The fighting was so intense, they became so isolated, there were islands out there. And so if they fell, Khe Sanh would fall. Now they were building trenches behind you. North Vietnamese started to build trenches behind you. They never got to the base, however. But patrols could not leave the combat bases. And patrols couldn't leave out of 881 north and south. They couldn't get out of the perimeter, because the minute they did, they were ambushed and killed. They had one story of 22 men who went out on a patrol. They were only supposed to go about 1,000 yards this way. They did the classic thing, hey, they're running from us. Let's get some prisoners. They ran beyond the effective range of their supporting arms into an ambush. Many of them were killed. They fell back in. No more patrols left here. And this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks. They had one dramatic moment when once again the ammo dump got hit. It flew for 12 hours, exploding. They feared that the NBA would be able to take advantage of that. And had they had the dynamics, they would have. But they didn't have the ability to adapt to change. They had elements of 3 divisions here, 320, 324, 325. The North Vietnamese say, we didn't have whole divisions here, we just had enough to keep you excited, keep you distracted from going down to Hue and Saigon, keep you up here. We used massive air power. Over 1,000 B-52 strikes went into this area. More bombs were dropped here, 30,000 tons of bombs. In about 2 months' time, 30,000 tons of bombs. Try to do the math in your head. I can't do it, it hurts my brain too much. B-52 started to be able to be adapted. Instead of them having to get their assignment 24 hours in advance so they could plan it and just drop there, they were able to start working at where they could come here. And remember how I talked about the sensors that they used along the Trace McNamara's wall? They dropped them up here, but they didn't have time to plot exactly where they were. They had general idea, but they could get trends. They could start feeling vibrations, and they found out if they're here now, oh, they're here now, they're moving at this pace, they're right there, let's drop bombs here and we'll catch them. They actually broke up at least 2 attacks before they happened. And they know that they broke up these attacks because they heard radio calls about, we can't do it, you know, we're devastated, we can't attack. But there were never as many as we thought there were. Because once again, they had a lot of engineers here. Remember I talked about the engineers? Engineers were building trenches. When they got the trenches close enough, they would have brought in all the raw infantry to charge out of those trenches and try to take the camp. They never tried to take the camp. They had little evidence of soldiers coming in, infiltrating the wire to see what was there. They actually saw 2 or 3 guys in NBA uniforms at a distance. They shot all 3 of them, wounded 1. The other 2 were killed. Turns out they were field commanders looking at the whole camp. Just by luck, they got those guys. And they were able to figure out who was here, what the units were. The media made it sound like the Marines were besieged and desperate for help. The first cav, remember how they were coming up? They were coming up and they got involved in the Battle of Hue at Camp Evans and all that. They were actually on their way up here to start opening up the highway, Highway 9, to rescue the Marines. The Marines didn't like that concept. But when they came in with their aviation, they did something the Marines had never seen. When they got down where LZ Stud was in Vandergrift, I pointed that out to you, they said, we're going to set up a landing zone there with all the supplies we need, and instead of us going down that road, fighting every inch of that road, we're going to use heliborne lift. We're going to put battalions on the north side of the road, on the east side of the road, south side of the road. We're going to cover all the sides of the road, and we're not going to let the NVA ambush our convoys. So it took 57 bridges, some larger than some smaller. 57 bridges had to be rebuilt on Highway 9. And they finally got it opened up several months later. And when the first CAF guys showed up, the Marines said, we never asked for your help. Well, of course, they were joking. They're kind of glad to see him. But what's interesting is that all happened after Titus 68 ended. And the irony of it was, William Westmoreland was basically fired and moved back to the States because of the embarrassment of all his comments of, we're winning, we've killed all the enemy, we don't know who's fighting us, but we've won the battle. It became obvious we had not. Creighton Abrams takes over, and he's sympathetic with the Marines. He says, it's stupid to have to waste all these resources to try to keep this place up with the shitty weather, the anti-aircraft guns, and he made the decision, we're going to withdraw from Khe Sanh. And they did a controlled withdrawal. They slowly moved troops out. The first CAV moved out. The Marines moved out. They actually had a separate operation, which was a cleanup. They did a cleanup of the base. They were down to 1 battalion. They were attacked by a company of NVA. The only major attack on the actual base, which was repulsed. Finally, and I've got the dates here. You may not care about the dates. I'll tell you if you want them. The last Marines left, and within several days, North Vietnamese soldiers came back and placed the flag and said, we won the battle. The North Vietnamese said, and it's really, really true, the North Vietnamese said, we were able to force the Americans out of a place because they'd never really done that before. Now, we should have never made this a place to be. I mean, that's the bottom line. It was hyper expensive in life and material to be here in Khe Sanh. So we shouldn't have been here. Really, Westmoreland was wrong. The Marines were right. Krulik and Walt said we should be in the lowlands where all the people are, not up here in the middle of God-forsaken nowhere. So the North Vietnamese claimed victory for this, but we had the heroic stand of the Marines. Now that wasn't the end of Khe Sanh, which is ironic again. We came back to Khe Sanh for a thing called Lam Son 719.
Yes.
In Lam Son 719, we did the fighting here where we came in for a few months in 1971, reestablished fuel, reestablished supplies. This is a primary place where the helicopter assaults into Laos went, and this is a primary place where all the emergency birds came straggling back from Laos with tail boom shot to hell, with wounded and dying crew members on board, or dead crew members on board. This is where they evacuated them to. The place we were at the border at Lang Vey, there was American artillery right there shooting into Laos, but no Americans were technically allowed to be on the ground in Laos. So our advisors couldn't go in with the Vietnamese, but our helicopters certainly could. So we ended up with a lot of Americans on the ground in Laos. They were called down crew members.
Yep.
So they were there. But this place once again became an operational Khe Sanh. But it was only for the time of Lam Son. When the last ARVNs were out of there, they began a withdrawal out of Lang Vey. They withdrew to here. They were getting rocketed. Places that were going to stop, like the Razorback. They were having trouble keeping Highway 9 open in the last bit, like getting past the Razorbacks, getting past the rock pile. The roads were being ambushed and rocketed by people up north of there, NVA shooting at that point. So we evacuated Khe Sanh for the second time. And second time, the North Vietnamese came in with a company, reposted their flag, and said once again, another victory against the Americans and the South Vietnamese, because we kicked their asses out of Laos and we kicked them once again out of Khe Sanh. They can't stand against us. Now, could we have stood here? Yeah, but at great cost. And really, there's people in the lowlands where the populations were that were far more important than up here. But that's the story of Khe Sanh. Some of the numbers we have here, U.S. losses, not necessarily here on the runway. Like I said, I'm talking about those outer areas there. Like remember, Hill 950 was hit one night. The soldiers, the Marines rather, sat down here and we looked at Hill 950 being hit. And they could see the tracers when the clouds raising up and the explosions going on. No radio comm. They thought those guys were all wiped out. But they saw fighting going on at the first light, and they went with helicopters and inserted troops. It turns out the North Vietnamese had only been able to take about half of the top of Hill 950. They were able to get it back. 274 died, 2,541 were wounded. Now that doesn't include the ARVN. The second operation, Pegasus, the recovery, 730 Americans were killed there. And Scotland 2, which was the cleanup of the Battle of Khe Sanh, 485 were killed there as well. And that was the Marines just trying to come in and find the bodies that were still up there. Were 881, the guys who got ambushed out here, 22 dead Americans laid out here for weeks and weeks and weeks. There was a Jeep with 4 Americans not far from here that was in no man's land for several months before they could get to their bodies. So even the cleanup was a fight in itself. The numbers of North Vietnamese, once again, unknown. They counted 1,602 bodies for sure. The estimates, of course, go anywhere from 10,000 to 15,000 were the public announcement. We killed 10,000 to 15,000 of those sons of bitches out there. The CIA, though, had their own, and they said 5,550 were killed. So probably the better intelligence estimate said, maybe 1/3 of what we're claiming publicly. On the other hand, the North Vietnamese said they had 2,500 killed. Now, who has a real number? Who knows? But my guess is it's somewhere probably 2,500 to 5,000 North Vietnamese died in this fight. And as far as civilians go, there were 800 or so. ARVNs lost about 400 to 500 killed. But remember, this was mainly our fight here, not theirs. So this is where we're at. 30,000 tons of bombs, somewhere between 5 to 10% did not blow up. So all those explosives were out here. They've been doing a cleanup since the end of the war. The shells you see out here, a lot of them were collected up. In Laos, they're using the drop tanks from fighters as canoes and things like that, even to this day. But we have the layers of the ground here. The museum's got some interesting artifacts. You'll kind of laugh when you read the tallies of what they claim they killed. Like they sank 55 ships here at Khe Sanh. 55 American ships were sank. It's a long way to the water. So you'll get a little laugh when you see the numbers they claim. But some of the relics are genuine. It's interesting to go down. Those of you who've not seen GI bunkers or hooches, They kind of have a recreation. You can't go inside, I don't believe, but you can look at it. That's kind of what they look like. Sandbags here are filled with concrete. Not that many places where they allowed to build concrete sandbags, because we were supposed to be permanent. We're supposed to be temporary. They wouldn't let us do that, so we replace sandbags all the time. I'll be around for more questions.